Hi, my name's Barrie Crampton. Welcome to another episode of Straight Outta Crampton. If you think that sounds like you, please get help. Now, I wrote this blog years ago. If I was writing it today, it would be written completely differently. Certainly without as much perceived humour. At the time I thought it was funny. Now not so much. Recent experiences and just throughout my time in the motor trade, the amount of alcohol abuse I've come across, people resorting to alcohol to try and fix the problems when, you know, clearly it doesn't. So I've been affected recently by somebody who I tried to help, tried my best to help, did everything I could. Don't think they've got a problem, don't want any help. What do you do? Anyway, this was probably one of my first experiences, and it's called The Car Job, It's Enough to Drive You to Drink. As I say, this was written a long time ago, so don't think I'm making fun. It's just, at the time it was new to me, but since then, you know, it's very, very common in the motor trade. It had been an awful weekend. I hadn't seen any customers, I hadn't sold anything, and I was dreading the Monday morning sales meeting. I'd only been with the firm a short while. They were part of a big manufacturer-owned group, and they worked a lot differently than the family firm I'd been working for previously. We worked in teams of two, and this weekend I was with a different guy than I usually was. I'm going to refer to him as Jack Anori, for reasons that will become obvious later. We sat in the meeting and the boss asked me what I'd achieved. I'm not one to try and make excuses, but I tried my best to sound positive. Sounding positive wasn't going to hit my target. Although I'd kept myself busy by ringing all my prospects, I hadn't got anything to show for it. The bottom line was I'd got nothing on the go or in my sales pipeline. The boss's face looked like thunder. He wasn't a particularly nice person. I didn't like him at all. The only consolation was that my sales partner hadn't sold anything either, and at least he would back me up when he told the boss what he'd done. Well, that's what I thought. When he set off reading from his diary the cars that he'd sold, the people he'd appointed for test drives, and all the other ups he had on for the weekend, I started to doubt my own sanity. As far as I knew, the only thing that he'd done during the weekend was disappear and leave me on my own for a few hours on the Saturday and the Sunday without any explanation. I was still staring at Jack in disbelief when the boss turned to me and really laid into me. He gave me a right rollicking in front of everyone. So while he's been doing all that, what the fucking hell were you doing? The boss was a Cockney. I was dumbfounded. Being new, I didn't want to answer him back. And I didn't want to call the other salesman a liar. So instead, I sat there and took it, looking at the floor and offering the odd stutter in my defence. I was the bad guy, but Jack seemed to have developed a halo. I spent the next 2 weeks hitting the phone and trying my hardest to make appointments. I watched Jack very carefully, and none of the imaginary people that he'd sold cars to, or that he'd supposedly appointed the previous weekend, ever actually transpired into real deals or test drives. You didn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out his fictitious test drives was so that he could claim petrol chits. My suspicions were confirmed when I saw him at the fuel station filling his wife's car up in exchange for the fictional test drive chits. Now, I like my food, and for my lunch I'd occasionally go round to the local pub and have a steak lunch and a Coca-Cola. It was on one of these outings I saw Jack pull up outside in a brand new car with trade plates on. He had a customer in the passenger seat. The next few minutes were like a comedy sketch. Jack breezed in through the double doors of the pub like he was entering a Wild West saloon. He went to the bar and he ordered 2 pints of their extra strength bitter. He didn't even appear to swallow as he poured one after the other down his throat. In the meantime, his customer was making himself comfortable in the driver's seat. Jack then took his packet of extra strong mints from his pocket and returned to his real test drive. The next weekend I was on with Jack was equally disastrous. 2 customers came in looking for him and I couldn't find him. He wasn't answering the tannoy, so I had to try and deal with him. Jack had actually hidden in the valeting cupboard. Jack spent a lot of time in the valeting cupboard. He seemed to have some form of OCD and was always going in to get some Mr. Sheen and a duster to clean his desk or polish a mark off a car somewhere or the window. Customer number 1 explained that he'd been promised mats and mud flaps in the deal and he'd got neither. Jack had told him that they were both out of stock at the factory and he would ring him as soon as they came off back order. I knew Jack was spinning him a yarn, so I took his details and told him that I would pass the message on to our parts department. He'd got his logbook back from the DVLA and he said that they'd incorrectly put it was an 1100cc car and not a 1300cc car. I was getting a little suspicious about Jack's sales techniques, so after taking the customer's details and promising him a return phone call, I went and dug his file out. He'd been charged for a 1300cc model, but the photocopy of the manufacturer's invoice clearly showed that the car was a cheaper 1100cc version. There was no visible difference between the two, but accidentally on purpose, he'd got an inferior, cheaper car. Jack was digging himself a hole that was going to collapse on him soon. This time I let Jack go first in the sales meeting and he spouted an equal load of tripe. For me it was like being in the twilight zone. I couldn't believe the boss never suspected that he was bullshitting or asked what happened to all the other customers that were supposed to be buying cars. But it had come to my notice that he too was very fond of his liquid lunches. It seemed that the boss and Jack were drinking to forget, and it was working. There was a programme on TV when I was a kid called Jack and Ori, where a famous person would read a story from a book.
Jack and Ori, Jack and Ori.
As soon as my sales partner opened his diary, I would sing Jack and Ori under my breath, and much to the amusement of the other lads. Jack reeled off all his imaginary dealings over the weekend. He'd actually sold 1 car. He tried to get me involved by saying he'd shown me the part exchange, as I'd come from a Vauxhall garage and I knew how much they were worth. If he was getting me involved, it would probably be to cover up another cock-up. And in any case, I can't lie for myself, so I wasn't going to lie for him. Neither am I a grass, so I said he must have gotten mixed up with somebody else, as I hadn't seen it. Nothing else was said about his deals, and so it was my turn. I reported that I had 2 signed orders, both with deposits. But then I had to endure another cross-examination as to why I wasn't pulling my weight, why I hadn't seen half as many customers, and why I hadn't done as many test drives. The boss had all the clues in front of him. He put them all together, and in a complete opposite to Sherlock Holmes' logical explanation, he eliminated the possible and was left with only the impossible. So he deduced that it was me who was slacking. I dropped myself in it further by protesting that if all these customers had been in the showroom, I must have nodded off at my desk. I was being sarcastic, but the boss was beginning to think I was having blackouts. I'd hit my target and I wanted a weekend off. Actually, that was just really a plausible excuse not to work with Jack. One of the other salesmen wasn't doing very well, so I offered to give him one of my deals if he'd cover for me at the weekend, and he readily agreed. I immediately regretted my ploy, because when I arrived at work on Monday morning, the sales manager was sat at my desk waiting for me. I was marched into the boss's office. They both looked deadly serious, and I thought perhaps they were going to reprimand me for swapping weekends. But I was at a loss when the boss reached down and lifted up a grey rubbish bin. Do you mind explaining this, please? Although judging from their expression, I was in a grave situation. The opportunity that presented itself was just too good to miss, and I hated him. So I said, "No problem, boss. That's a bin. When you have any litter or waste paper, you put it in that, rather than throw it on the showroom floor and make the place look untidy. You fucking smart arse. I mean these that we found in your waste bin." With that, he turned the bin upside down and out fell half a dozen empty cans of Carlsberg Special Brew. With hindsight, I thought they could have been searching for something that would explain the blackouts that they thought I was experiencing at the weekends, but they had to have a rethink when I told them someone else was the culprit, as I'd been off. I really enjoyed the Monday morning sales meeting. It was like watching tennis and an episode of Columbo, except Peter Falk had been replaced by a Cockney git. Jack did well to come up with a plausible story that was almost believable if you were a half-wit. A customer must have emptied them out of his old car when he picked his new one up. Only one car had been delivered that weekend, so a quick phone call would have solved the mystery. But the boss didn't want to cause the customer any embarrassment. We were all warned that he was watching us and that he would continue his inquiries. This could still be trouble for me, as the guy couldn't find his arse with both hands, especially after lunch. The next couple of weeks, suspicions moved away from me, as I seemed to have my blackouts under control, and I was handling as many inquiries as my new partner. Our valeter had also sustained a nasty gash to his head and a suspected concussion. He was almost knocked out when a half-full bottle of whiskey dropped on his head while he was moving a box off the shelf in the valeting cupboard. Everyone knew it couldn't be mine, as I considered the valeting cupboard to be a no-go area and strictly off limits. Cockney Columbo's investigation was given another accidental shot in the arm by the plumber, who'd come to see what was causing our showroom to flood during the heavy rainfall. He discovered the sluice pipe that ran directly under Jack and Ori's desk was blocked up with empty whiskey bottles and empty cans of Carlsberg Special Brew. When Jack couldn't fit any more of his empties down the sluice, he'd put them in my waste bin. Now, on a more serious note, if anybody thinks that they may have a problem with alcohol, then Alcoholics Anonymous shows you, put your postcode in, shows you meetings in your town and times. If you are the family of somebody and you're being affected by somebody else's drinking, these Al-Anon family groups, UK and I. What can I say? There's all sorts of addictions, but I've had my fill of alcohol addictions. I really have. If you think that sounds like you, please get help. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Bye bye.